Franchises get sold as one of the safer ways to own a business. In fast food especially, the promise is simple. The brand already exists, the menu already works, the kitchen system is already built, customers already recognize the name, other locations are already open. And compared with opening an independent restaurant from scratch, that can make the whole thing feel much less like a gamble and much more like a proven machine you are stepping into. That is what makes the offer powerful, but this is usually where the trap starts. Subway is one of the clearest reminders that a big brand and busy stores do not automatically mean strong owner economics, because a fast food franchise can look strong at store level and still be weak at owner profit level. The queue can be real, the sales can be real, the brand can be real, and the owner can still get squeezed by food costs, labor, rent, royalties, mandatory suppliers, delivery platform pressure, and fixed brand rules they cannot easily change. That is the part many buyers never stress test hard enough before committing. They see a stronger surface and assume it means a stronger owner business. But those are not the same thing. And if you miss that distinction, you can buy what looks like safer ownership and end up carrying a much weaker business than the brand led you to expect. The real question is not whether the store looks proven. It is whether the owner economics are still strong after the full structure starts taking its share. The reason this gets missed so often is that the franchise arrives looking like reduced uncertainty. You are not inventing the concept. You are not building the brand from zero. You are not guessing at the menu. You are not working out the store design, the kitchen flow, the packaging, or the operating format on your own. That matters, and it is why the model feels safer. But the hidden assumption underneath that feeling is simple. A business becomes safer just because more of it has already been pre-built for you. And that assumption breaks much faster in real operation than people expect. Because once you step into a fast food franchise, you often do not get the freedom of an independent restaurant owner with the protection people imagine a proven system should provide. You get something narrower. The franchisor may control the brand, the menu standards, the store format, the approved suppliers, parts of the pricing logic, the marketing rules, and the operating procedures. But the franchisee still carries the pressure that matters most at ground level. The rent is still yours. The staffing problems are still yours. The local customer demand is still yours. The day-to-day execution is still yours. If sales disappoint, if wages rise, if the location underperforms, or if local conditions are weaker than projected, that pressure does not sit with the brand in the abstract. It lands on the operator running that specific site. That is the first real break in the promise. And it gets worse if the site was approved on economics that never worked properly to begin with. One of the clearest red flags in franchising is a location with occupancy costs that mathematically do not work but still gets approved because the brand wants the site open and the fee collected. The system may reduce some uncertainty, but it can also reduce flexibility exactly when flexibility matters most. If staffing costs rise, you may not be free to simplify the offer enough to protect labor. If margins compress, you may not be free to source differently or reduce menu complexity. If your area behaves differently than the franchisor's model assumed, you may not be free to adapt fast enough to protect the economics. So what looks like support from the outside can become restriction from the inside. And once a system is sold as proven, a lot of buyers stop asking the harder question, proven for whom? One of the ugliest franchise realities is that a system can be very effective at generating franchise fees, royalties, and brand growth for the franchisor, while still being much less effective at protecting unit-level profitability for the operator. Subway is one of the clearest examples of that split. The brand could keep pushing system-wide growth and traffic, while franchisees argued that store-level economics were getting weaker, not stronger. That is why the real franchise trap usually starts in the economics, not in the branding. A franchise can look strong at the revenue level and still be weak at the owner profit level once the full structure is running. First, there are the upfront costs of entry. Upfront costs include franchise fee, fit out or build out cost, kitchen equipment, signage, seating, opening inventory, working capital. Sometimes debt is layered on top just to get the location open. Then the ongoing layer begins: royalties, marketing contributions, required systems, approved suppliers, and brand standards that can raise operating cost without protecting local margin enough. On top of that, you still carry rent, labor, local competition, local demand swings, spoilage risk, cleaning, maintenance, and the pressure of keeping the site running every day. This is where many buyers get fooled by visible activity. They see a recognized brand, decent foot traffic, a busy-looking location, or respectable gross sales, and assume the owner must be doing well. But a business can look busy and still be economically tight. Think about what that looks like in practice. A buyer takes on a branded fast food location because the store looks busy, the menu is proven, and the system already exists. The opening month feels encouraging. Orders are moving, the kitchen is active, the brand looks real in the market. But once the business settles into normal trading, the pressure starts showing up where the buyer did not feel it in the sales story. Weekday traffic is softer than expected. Labor stays expensive. Ingredient and packaging costs keep moving. Royalties and marketing fees keep taking their share. Delivery orders bring volume but weaker economics. The operator is still responsible for keeping standards high, staffing the site, solving day-to-day problems, and protecting customer experience. So the store can look alive and operationally real, while the owner still ends up with much less margin than the proven business story implied. The franchise does not have to be collapsing to disappoint the owner. It only has to be much weaker in real economics than it looked in the sales story. That is why the trap often becomes visible only after launch, when the business stops being a projection and starts being a real site under real pressure. Once the doors are open, the owner is no longer judging the franchise by how polished the brand looks. They are judging it by what is left after wages, rent, fees, supplier costs, slower weekday traffic, weekend staffing gaps, equipment problems, delivery platform pressure, and daily operating problems keep hitting the business at the same time. That is when the model can start feeling far less protected than expected. So what should a serious prospective buyer actually look for before committing? Not just whether the brand is known, not just whether some locations look busy, not just whether the franchisor has a polished sales process. The real question is whether the business still works once the full burden lands on the local operator. That means checking things much more aggressively than most buyers do. First, rebuild the economics from the ground up. Do not ask what the sales deck says the restaurant can make. Ask what is left after the full fee stack is removed. What is the upfront franchise fee? What are the ongoing royalties? What marketing contributions are mandatory? What software, platform, training, compliance, or brand system costs sit underneath the glossy sales story? In a fast food franchise, you should be able to see clearly what is left after food cost, labor, rent, and royalties, not just what is left before the hard parts are counted. If the economics are only shown at gross sales level, the buyer is already being asked to trust the wrong number. Second, model the business under realistic conditions, not optimistic ones, not launch hype, not best month revenue, not ideal staffing, not perfect demand. Ask whether the owner still makes acceptable money after realistic labor cost, rent, utilities, local marketing, maintenance, wastage, downtime, and supplier pricing are fully included. If the model only looks attractive when traffic stays strong and labor behaves nicely, that is not safety. That is fragility wearing a brand. Third, test margin control. If food costs rise, if wages rise, or if delivery app commissions keep taking more of the order value, can the operator change pricing fast enough to protect margin, or does the system leave the franchisee carrying inflation while the brand keeps control? Subway is a good example of what this can look like. Promotions like the $5 footlong help drive traffic and system-wide sales, but many franchisees argued that the economics at the store level suffered. Fourth, test supplier risk and fee use. Are approved suppliers genuinely protecting quality, or are they locking the operator into ingredient and packaging costs that make local profitability much weaker than it appears on paper? And where do marketing fees actually go? Are they improving local traffic and local economics, or mainly funding national brand activity that does not solve the operator's real problem? Fifth, test local economics, not network averages, and test territory density much harder than most buyers do. Subway is again a useful warning sign. The brand expanded so aggressively in many places that stores ended up competing with each other. That may help the system spread, but it does not help the individual operator when the same customer demand is divided across too many units. Average system performance is not your protection if your unit economics are weak. Sixth, test downside behavior. What happens if the first year is slower than planned? What happens if labor stays expensive? What happens if local demand is only decent, not exceptional? What happens if the business has to trade for months with lunch traffic below plan, delivery mix worse than expected, or labor costs above target? If the model only works when conditions are unusually smooth, it is not resilient. Do not get seduced by low startup friction on its own. Subway also became attractive partly because it was cheaper and simpler to open than many other fast food concepts. But lower entry cost does not guarantee strong cash flow per store. Seventh, test franchisor behavior when a location struggles. Do they meaningfully improve local economics? Do they reduce pressure, expand flexibility, or help fix what is structurally wrong? Or do they mainly enforce compliance while the operator continues absorbing the downside? Do not just speak to recently opened franchisees who are still in the honeymoon period. Ask to speak with franchisees who have been in the system for 5 years or more. Ask what changed after the opening excitement wore off. Ask what their margins look like now versus year one. Ask what happens when a location misses targets, runs into labor pressure, or underperforms on weekday traffic. And before you trust any sales story, go straight to the FDD and look at what happened to real operators inside the system. How many franchisees closed in the last 3 years? What were the stated reasons for those closures? What percentage of locations were transferred, terminated, abandoned, not renewed, or simply ceased operating? What has the franchisor changed in the system to improve outcomes? If those answers are vague, defensive, or hidden behind generic language such as they didn't follow the system, that is not reassurance. That is another warning sign. That is the real judgment a buyer has to make. A franchise is not safer just because the brand is stronger. It is only safer if the economics still work after the brand, the fees, the restrictions, and the local operating pressure are all accounted for at the same time. A strong logo is not the same thing as strong owner economics. A polished system is not the same thing as flexible control. And a busy-looking location is not the same thing as a business that leaves enough room for the person carrying the actual risk. So before someone commits, the real test is not whether the franchise feels more organized than starting from scratch. The real test is whether the operator still has enough margin, enough resilience, and enough control once the full structure becomes real. If those answers are weak, vague, or dependent on optimistic assumptions, then the franchise is weaker than it looks. That does not mean every franchise is bad. It means the promise should be judged much harder than the sales version usually encourages. Because the real franchise trap is not just cost, it is misjudging what kind of business you are actually buying into. From the outside, it can look like you are buying a safer version of ownership because the brand is known, the system is built, and the model appears proven. But underneath, you may be buying a business where a meaningful share of the upside is already spoken for, while a large share of the local pressure is still yours. And unless the numbers still work after the fees, the restrictions, the staffing pressure, and the local uncertainty are treated seriously, Do not commit to the model as if proven automatically means safe. Because in a lot of fast food franchise businesses, that is exactly where the promise starts breaking.